What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the iOS Dev Podcast. In this episode, I got a chance to sit down with Chris Vasselli. Chris is an iOS developer who's currently building out Nihongo, which is a Japanese learning app for students. Chris has been working on the app for quite a few years, and he's actually built a substantial user base. We go through on his journey in building the app and as a developer. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. So what's the story behind Nihongo?
Nihongo, I started developing back in 2012. I was living in Japan. I lived in Japan from 2012 to 2014. And when I was there that first time, I was doing like Japanese language classes full time. And so it was kind of the tool I wish existed, basically. Like what happened was I was living in Japan. So I wanted to be studying the words I was encountering in real life, right? Like a word that I'd see at the train station or something. And I had a dictionary app that I liked, so I'd use that to go look up a word. And then I had a flashcard app that I liked, so I would, basically look up the word in the dictionary app, then create a flashcard in my flashcard app for that word, so that I could study it. But this got like really tedious. And so I wanted to make that a little easier. And so my first sort of attempt at solving that problem was actually to take, my dictionary app had like an export function that could export to some file format. And my flashcard app had an import function that could import from a different format. So I basically had something set up on my phone where I could export the like word list of words I looked up in my dictionary to their format, put it in a file in Dropbox. This was like pre-iCloud, so put it inside something on Dropbox. I had my laptop set up, sitting on my desk in my apartment in Japan. I just leave it open all day. And it had a folder action, which is a thing that lets you run a script, run like an Apple script, I think it is, or an automation whenever a new file is added to a folder. So it was set up to watch this folder and detect the new file, run a script that would convert it to the flashcard app format, and then so I'd upload it to the Dropbox, wait 30 seconds, and then go into my flashcard app and download the file that it created, and then study my flashcard app. So that was like my first take at it, and I was like, "Oh man, there must be a better way, right?"
This is the most like developer story ever. Like,
yeah, exactly, right. Like going to absurd lengths to automate something that really I probably didn't save any time at the end of the day, but it was fun. And then, but it was kind of like, man, wouldn't it be great if there was an app that just did that? And so that was like version 1.0 of Nihongo. I basically just started developing something that I like. Made a Japanese dictionary that whenever I looked up a word in the dictionary, it would automatically turn that into a flashcard. And that was like the very first version that I built was just those two features, was like a basic dictionary and then a basic flashcard feature. And that ended up being kind of the origin of it. And it's kind of, so the whole sort of idea of the app through to today now is like making it easy to study from words that you're encountering in real life. Or, and if you're living in Japan, that might be, like I said, like seeing a word at the train station. Or if you're, just self-studying in the United States or wherever at home, you might be into video games or manga or anime or something. So you see a word, you look it up. It's like making it so it's really easy to create flashcards and like study from that. So now it has features like being able to take a picture of the word and automatically take that picture and attach it to a flashcard, and different things like that. So really trying to make it super easy to study from those words you're encountering naturally. But that was the origin, was just sort of the thing I wanted when I was living in Japan a decade ago.
When you launched, did it make a big splash, or how was that? Or did it take some time to gain traction?
Yeah, not at all. And I was okay with that. Like, so I think maybe the first year I made like $100, if that. And then the second year it was maybe like $300 or something like that. Like the first couple of...
What was like the business model, or like how were you making the money?
It was, so like the dictionary side of it was all free, but then the flashcards and another feature called clippings, which lets you like copy and paste text into the app, that and flashcards were paid. And it started as a $4 one-time in-app purchase, then went up to an $8. I moved that to $8 at one point, and then years later, it's now a subscription. But yeah, so that was it. It was like basically, I think the idea was, okay, if I'm the best dictionary out there, that'll get me everybody coming to it, because that's what people are mostly looking for. And then they'll see these other things and be like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. I could, everything I look up is already ready for me to study from. Like that's
Mhm.
pretty cool. I want to go try that out.
Are there a lot of apps doing that, or are you like one of the big players? Do you know much about like the market in terms of the app?
Yeah, there are other apps out there. So yeah, like Yomiwa, Imiwa, Japanese, um, Shirabe, Jisho. Like there's
Mhm.
probably, I mean, there's kind of like the Japanese dictionary market, which is kind of the main thing I think like I compete with, and there's maybe
Mhm.
5 or 6 of them that are pretty big. Um, and then I'm kind of branching more and more out into like the Japanese learning space now. I have a second app called Nihongo Lessons now, which is like a little more directed, a little more guided, trying to teach you
Mhm.
Japanese. So that's maybe a little bit more competing with like Duolingo and like other more like actually let's
Yeah.
teach you Japanese kind of things. Um,
Mhm.
but it's not like, especially in the Japanese dictionary side, there's not like a huge dominant player or something.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't think Nihongo is the biggest. But it's in the top 3 or 4.
Yeah. And what was the first big break? I forgot. Did you mention that?
The first big breakout was actually kind of an interesting story. It was in China.
Okay.
um, so yeah, I had been kind of just plodding along and developing it. I had a full time dev job, so this was like a side project. This is after I moved back from Japan. Um, Worked on it a little bit on the side, but mostly just features that I wanted for, I kept on using it myself to study. So I was mostly just working on it to add things I wanted. And then all of a sudden I started getting a bunch of downloads in China. And this was really confusing to me. And like purchases in China too. So it wasn't just like, download bots or something. So weird because this is like at the time, just an English to Japanese dictionary, right? Like there was
Mhm.
no Chinese component to it. So what I found was I like finally figured out there's this like Chinese Q&A website, and someone had basically asked a question on there like what's the best Japanese dictionary, or I can't remember exactly what it was, what are good tools on iOS for learning Japanese.
Mhm.
And someone had actually taken the time to write up effectively a guide to how to use Nihongo, where you use all the features to look up the Japanese word. And then when you get to the point where you're at a dictionary entry where it's showing the meaning in English, they had a shortcut. At the time, it was still called Workflow because Apple hadn't bought it
Mhm.
yet. So it was a workflow
Mhm.
that you could run that would automatically machine translate the English into Chinese. And so, I mean, I was baffled by this because to me, like machine translations are garbage, and like it was especially back in 2016 or something, whenever this was. So the
Yeah.
idea that machine translations of English definitions of Japanese words would be like at all useful was
Yeah.
a huge surprise to me. But people were downloading it. It got really big in China, and so I ended up just like going with that and running with it, localizing the app into
Mhm.
Chinese, adding. I couldn't get like natively written Chinese definitions for the Japanese words, but I could at least machine translate everything ahead of time so that it could be in the database and indexed, so search would work against Chinese searches. And people, it was a little more of a first class feature where you could see the
Mhm.
Chinese and then it would also show you the English that it came from. But so basically, just like taking what they had developed with this shortcut and instead doing it in the app natively supported. um, and so that was my first big sort of
Yeah.
burst of sales.
And what? So you launched in 2012, and when did that happen?
I don't remember exactly. I started developing it in 2012. I launched in 2014. I think
Oh.
that was like 2016, maybe.
So you getting traction in the Chinese market.
Yeah,
That's that's so weird. Right? Like, um,
yeah.
you would never expect that, or and how do you
I
even
was.
find like that article or that the
It
place that?
Yeah, it was hard because Google doesn't really find it. I ended up searching, what is it, Baidu, the like Chinese major search engine, and searching for, I think it was maybe a link to the App Store, or maybe, what I think it might have been is that, how every app has what they call an Apple ID in App Store Connect,
Yeah.
and that's part of the URL in all
Mhm.
languages, like to the app link to the App Store. So I think if you like, so now I have like a Google alert for that number and F5 bot and some other things to track just references to that number, and that's a pretty good way to find. No matter how someone formats the link, it'll include that number. So I think I ended up searching for that on Baidu, and then eventually found this question answer site.
Oh, well, that's a pretty cool hack, right? Like for people who have like indie apps, and maybe one day you wake up and you have like a bunch of random downloads.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's a little tricky. I mean, you can go on App Store Connect, and there's a way to see like web referrers, so you can see people that linked directly from your app or from a website linked directly to your app.
Mm-hmm.
So that can also help. But a lot of times I find it just people mention the app and then just say search on the App Store for Nihongo, and so those will just show up as search, and so it's hard to figure out where the source is when that happens. But
yeah. And have you recently used like any AI for the like machine translations? I think that's a little bit better, right?
Yeah, it is a little better. I need to do that. I haven't done that. Yeah, I think the machine translation could really be improved. I'm using right now. I'm still using the Microsoft translation API, and maybe they've switched over to doing something AI under the hood. So I might be just getting it for free, but I need to look into that.
Yeah. So after the big Chinese break, I don't know.
Yeah.
Was that enough to make you go full time with the app, or what was your thought process after that?
That started to make me take it more seriously as a possibility, because at the time, honestly, when I launched it on the App Store, I just decided not to focus on it as like a source of income. I just decided like that's just going to stress me out and make it not fun anymore. And this is mostly a project for me for fun. Like I like developing. I like having my own app project. I like getting excited about WWDC to see the new APIs I can use. Like it was a hobby, and I kind of didn't want to ruin that. So until that point, I basically had continued developing it just as a hobby, but wasn't really focused on making it make money. So that was like 2016. I ended up, I still had a full-time job. I was working at Box, the cloud file sharing company at the time. So I left that in 2018. So that was about 2 years later. And I think that was like, I think in early 2018, like January, I switched to subscriptions. And that was a big thing that also like made me start to feel like it was viable as a full-time thing, just because all of a sudden I wasn't at the whim of Apple's search algorithm anymore on the App Store. Like there was always this fear if I had gone full time that, hey, this might all just dry up overnight if Apple changes their App Store search algorithm, and all of a sudden my app isn't prominent in any searches anymore. Because when you're paid up front, like in-app purchases, I mean, when you're just using one-time in-app purchases, you always have to be focused on new users and getting new users. Once I could switch to subscriptions and I could actually feel confident that like, hey, everybody isn't going to suddenly decide overnight to unsubscribe all at once. Like even if Apple's search algorithm changes, I can coast and figure something out. That was really huge. So I basically, I left in like September or October of 2018 is when I went full time on it. And it was kind of like I had some savings. I was at the point where I felt like, okay, I'll give myself like a year to get this to a point where I can live off of this. And then and now it's been 5 years. I'm more or less still, like basically make a modest living off of it. Enough to kind of get by. I'm not making as much as I did when I was a full-time developer, but the lifestyle is great, so I'm happy.
Yeah. Then how was that transition when you go from like a one-time payment to subscription? Because I'm guessing you have to. Do your current users have to transition, or is it just for the new users? How you go about that?
I just did it for new users. So I grandfathered everybody in that already had paid the one-time purchase. And then new users would get the subscription. And then I immediately, I originally went to a subscription with no lifetime option, but of course immediately got people asking like, hey, like I really just hate subscriptions. Can you make a lifetime option? And so I brought back the lifetime option, which is basically just turning back on the one-time in-app purchase. But yeah, I mean, I guess I could have I think some people will say all the features that I've developed up to now, you get those with the in-app purchase you made before, but going forward, anything new is going to require the subscription. I don't know. I just didn't want to deal with that. I don't want to
Yeah.
make people mad. So
Yeah. That's interesting. Is it complex? Well, I'm guessing it's not that complex, right? With you just have to probably just add some like logic in your code to handle that, like some conditionals.
yeah, I mean, subscriptions in general are kind of a pain, and like even with StoreKit 2, I'm really kind of disappointed that like I was really excited when they announced StoreKit 2 because it's like, okay, yes, finally it's just like if user is subscribed, do X, and Apple handles the rest, you know? But it's not. It's like still more complicated than that and still buggy, and so that's frustrating. Um, but at the end of the day, it is just like if they purchased the subscription, this monthly subscription or the yearly subscription or this one-time in-app purchase, then everything is unlocked. So yeah, it's more or less simple, but
Yeah.
also
Have
buggy.
you
Yeah.
have you thought about using like the in-app purchase providers out there, like Revenue Cat and like Glassify? I think is one.
Yeah, so I actually did integrate Revenue Cat. I actually didn't have the best experience with it, so I ended up pulling it out and then just going back to doing straight StoreKit. Although it's funny because I actually still am a Revenue Cat subscriber because I have them on in like observer mode now. So basically, I don't rely on them for checking whether people are subscribed. I just use StoreKit directly for that. But I do like their analytics and things like that, and the ability to like look up a user by ID and see their purchase history and stuff like that. So it's funny, yeah. Like I had some issues with them just, and maybe it was just something in my particular setup, but I found it kind of unreliable. So I ended up using something else, or just using StoreKit. But it's all, unfortunately, it's all complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always trade-offs with everything, right? It's always trade-offs.
Yeah, that's the core of. I mean, if there's anything that I've learned in like being a software developer, it's all about evaluating trade-offs. Nothing is black and white.
Yep. Yeah, like I myself use I've just been using Revenue Cat to be honest.
Yeah, I mean,
because it's straightforward, and I mean I haven't had apps with like a huge user base yet, so
yeah, and I don't mean to badmouth Revenue Cat either. I mean, again, like I'm actually still a paying subscriber. I like it. I think I just maybe have some weird stuff in my app that's a little more complicated, or I don't know, or I set it up wrong or something. But
yeah. So how has been the going full time with the app? How has that been?
Yeah, I mean, it's been great. Just like lifestyle wise, being an indie app developer is really fantastic. I also have a 6-year-old kid, so they were 2 years old when I went full time indie, and so just I mean, I say I'm full time indie, but it's honestly more like half time indie, half time like stay at home dad, which is awesome that I can have that kind of part of my life as well, and be a big part of my kid's life. So, so that part is really fun. I also really like just using different parts of my brain every day. Like I'll have one day where I'm in development mode, but then another day where I'm in like design mode, another day where I'm in marketing mode, customer service. Like there's just so many different angles to it. Business development, I guess, like these kind of things, which is just a lot. It's a variety in life, and I find that kind of fun to learn new things and try to develop new skills. So I like that side of it a lot too.
Yeah. And how do you approach like the business side of the app? Like, do you have any like, do you try to learn certain business tactics? Do you test certain tactics out?
I mean, a little bit. I mean, I don't think I'm the best at it, but like, I guess I try to just not be afraid to try things. Is maybe the biggest thing. Like you can get really paralyzed by feeling like, man, if I mess this up, I'm going to blow everything up and I'm done. But like if you don't try things, you're not going to make any progress. So I mean, I try to do like I learn as much as like I do A/B testing on paywalls and stuff like that. So trying to do some of the things like that, and some of it is just seeing the right opportunities and trying to be, I don't know, agile enough to sort of lowercase a agile enough to do them, like the Chinese thing, right? Like being able to just decide, okay, like let's stop everything I'm doing and make this app better for Chinese users. Or when, like I mentioned, I developed this app Nihongo Lessons, which I released last year, which is more like the guided content thing. That actually came about just because there was this guy, Adam Shapiro, who had developed this program called Japanese Level Up. And it was a series of it started as just a website and a blog, and then he developed some like Anki, like another flashcard app, some like decks for that he was selling, and then he turned it into an app and things like that. But he just decided he was kind of done. He wanted to move on and do different things in his life. And so he was going to shut the whole thing down, but kind of said, hey, like if anybody contacts me in the next few weeks and wants to buy it, like, shoot me an email, we'll talk. And I didn't have enough money to really offer him a fair price to buy it. But I talked to him and we like figured out a deal to do something like a revenue share on it. And so it was kind of just seeing like, hey, here's this opportunity. Like, why don't we go and try it and see what happens? And not being afraid to kind of take that leap of faith that, maybe we can, hopefully it can work out.
Yeah, and he was like an instructor and a developer too, because you said he had an app, or did he have the app made by somebody?
I think his story, I can't remember. I think he recently became an iOS developer actually. But that was like a hobby maybe. I don't totally remember, but yeah, he had developed all this content basically long before he was doing the iOS development. So yeah, his background had been more in like developing all this Japanese language learning content.
Oh, and have you reached out to like influencers, like, or not like but like people who are in like the Japanese education space?
A little bit. I should do that more. Like, I think that's a clear space where I could market the app more. But I haven't done a lot of it, no.
Yeah, and are there communities or like marketing things that have worked well or that you've tried?
That's a good question. I think I've had some success doing like Apple search ads, like Apple App Store search ads. I used to do some Facebook ads, but I found that with those, because I can't track, like I don't want to do the Apple app tracking transparency prompt stuff. I don't want my app to track people. And so that makes it harder to do that. So I was like getting a lot of downloads, but it was not converting to any purchases. So I didn't have good luck with that. Other than that, I mean, I have social media presence. So I have like an Instagram account for Nihongo that I haven't been doing it lately, but for about a year, I would post at least once or twice a week, like some Japanese vocabulary with screenshots or with like from video games. And it would basically like use Nihongo to show like Nihongo looking up the word from the screenshot. And that got some traction. So that was good. But mostly, yeah, social media, some advertising, things like that. Honestly, though, most of it's been just word of mouth and I think in slow growth, because if I look at like the source of my downloads, it's overwhelmingly App Store search. And if I look at the like not App Store browse or anything like that, not direct app or web refers, it's mostly search. And most of the search keywords that I rank highly in are just brand keywords. So it's Nihongo Dictionary, Nihongo Japanese. It's things that include the name of my app. So I interpret that to mean that most people that are downloading the app are hearing about it from someone and then searching for it directly in the App Store. And I think that just takes a long time. Like it's been on the App Store for 9.5 years now. And it's just been very, very slow, steady growth the whole time. Like I said, like there was that Chinese bump, but that was like the first little bump. And then it's just really slowly and steadily grown for almost a decade now.
Yeah. And all right, so now I want to transition into how did you end up in Japan and how did you get into Japanese culture?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's like video games. Like it started when I was in, middle school and high school, being really into Japanese video games and anime and things like that. So I was lucky enough to go to a high school that offered Japanese. And so if I had a choice between taking, French or Spanish or Japanese, like Japanese.
Yeah.
I was into all that kind of nerd culture stuff. So
Yeah. That's
so
pretty
I started
cool.
I mean, and definitely feel privileged to live in a place that offered that. And so I took Japanese language classes in high school, and a little bit in college, and then after college, kind of just wanted the experience of living in another country, just as like a life experience to live outside the United States. And Japan was the obvious choice because I had spent time studying Japanese. Um, I also, I mean, I spent a lot of time in high school and in college, like making little games. Like I made web games in high school, and I made an iPhone game right after college that I published on, was like my first app on the App Store. And so I really wanted to be an indie game developer. Was actually my like first like life plan was to go, be an indie game developer. So going to Japan, part of that was like, okay, I quit my job, moved to Japan, and started working full time on doing indie games. And I ended up really not liking it actually once I was doing it like full time. It ended up being something I liked as a hobby, but not something I wanted to do full time, which is how I ended up transitioning into Japanese language classes and then starting Nihongo and things like that. But that was what kind of got me into it at first, was just like games and things like that. Then after living in Japan for a couple of years, I went back to the United States for eight years. But always kind of had that itch to go back. I liked living in Japan, but didn't really want to work for a Japanese company because Japan has a really intense work culture with like a lot of overtime and not a good work-life balance, I think. So then kind of having Nihongo get to the point where I could live off of it was a real enabler for me to come back to Japan, because now I can just, work on Nihongo and not and do that from here instead of having to work for a Japanese company.
Yeah. So wait, are you like an expert in Japanese then, having all this experience building out this app and learning Japanese for so long?
I mean, yeah, I think I'd call myself fluent in Japanese at this point. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been, I started learning Japanese in 2001, so it's been 22 years. So, yeah. And, now I live here.
Are you thinking of, or are you like officially living there now, or what are your future plans?
Plan right now is to be here for a few more years and then head back to the States. I still have, all my family's in the States. My parents are getting older. I'm also like, I really like Japanese elementary school. Had really good luck with that, and have been really happy with it. But when you get to middle school and high school in Japan, it's really competitive and really like a lot of like you have to take entrance exams to get into good schools, even at that age, and things like that. And a lot of the culture of like having kids go to juku, which is like they call it cram school in English, and it's kind of like after school you go to another school to study for the tests to get into a good school, and like all that kind of stuff just feels a little intense and not like I just want my kid to be able to be a kid. And so I think a little bit the sense is we'll stick around until late elementary school and then head back to the States.
Yeah, I've never been to Japan, but I'm always interested in Japanese culture and been a fan of anime. So I want to go one of these days.
Yeah, you should come. Let me know. I'll show you around.
So back to iOS development.
Yeah.
I think you said your first foray was developing like some games.
Yeah.
Was that your first like software experience, or how did you get into iOS development?
No, it wasn't my first software experience. So I started my first software experience. I started programming in high school. My high school offered my first class was a Visual Basic class. So this was 2001. So so Visual Basic is more about like making forms and things like that, like simple Windows applications that have text fields and buttons and things like that. But I really got into it actually. Like I basically figured out how to I think like a few weeks into the class I figured out that there were like a way to draw a shape on screen, and I figured out there were like timers that you could have certain code run on a timer, and then I figured out how to have keyboard input. And with those three things, I figured out, oh my gosh, like I can make Pong, and I went home and I built like a little Pong thing, and that was like just so eye-opening and so powerful to me to like realize, hey, I can actually like make something myself with this. So I got really into making games in high school, and knew I wanted to do like software. And so I went into college and I studied computer science and got a degree in computer science. And after college, went into I was actually in the like security, and I worked for this company, Big Fix, which was doing like security and sort of distributed systems. So I was mostly working in C++, on like Windows side stuff. And then, but the iPhone came out when I guess I was still in college when the iPhone came out, but I was definitely interested in that. I had a first, original iPhone, started playing around when the SDK came out. And again, like at this time, I was definitely still really into making games and intended to go into games after college. And so I started just playing around and made a game on the iPhone then, and that was kind of like as a side project. And it's funny because this was like before there were any this was before Open or Unity or any of the game engines were available. And I didn't really know what I was doing at all. So my game was actually basically like UI image views that I just manually manipulated the frames of. So it was all just basically a bunch of UI image views being moved around with timers and stuff. But that was my first iOS thing. And then I continued my like software engineer career, up until I left. I never actually was a full-time iOS developer at a company, except for like a brief stint at Box where I worked on their mobile team. But for the most part, my whole career up until 2018, when I left to be a full-time indie dev, was all other, more in the security space.
Yeah. Did you ever do any game development? Like hardcore game development?
I mean, not real. Like I never had a job at a game studio or anything like that. I have taken on client work that was like developing a game, so I did that once. But I would say I never really got deep into it. Yeah, mostly just on the hobby level.
Yeah, because I mean, I was a pretty avid gamer back in the day, and building out a game always seemed like a cool task, but it's a huge thing to take on, right? Like there's so much that goes into building like a game. You see, like I don't know, like Final Fantasy, GTA, or any Call of Duty. Like you can't really indie dev something like that.
No, I mean everything I've developed that I've actually gotten through to launch were puzzle games. So those are like 2D puzzle games, simple assets. Basically, what makes it fun is just like interesting ideas for the puzzle mechanics, So that's like the web games I made that I actually published, and my game on the App Store, and the client project I did were all like puzzle games. I do think it'd be fun at some point to work on a larger project, but I don't know if maybe some future stage of my career I'll go back and explore that more.
Yeah. And did you like think about doing web like development as well, or did you just always like iOS?
I did do web development a little bit. I spent about a year when I was at Box on the web front end team, actually. Mostly just to kind of try something else. Actually, I mean, I say I was in security. It was a kind of a combination of things. I was kind of a generalist. So I worked, like even at Box, I actually worked I was there for 4 years. And during that time, I spent some time on the iOS team, some time working on the desktop team on our Mac client, some time on the desktop team working on our Windows client, and then some time on the web front end team. So I definitely like just learning new things and learning new, software stacks and trying to kind of explore all those different things. So I think I don't know. I think iOS is a little more fun. I like iOS. I think for now, I've been 5 years focused entirely on it. And I mean, especially compared to doing Windows development, just the APIs are so much more modern. than at least 5 years ago Windows development felt. That it ends up being just a little bit more fun.
Yeah. So I saw that you were a speaker at the SwiftLeeds, right?
Yeah, it was my first speaking.
How was that?
I was a little nervous, but I think it went well, and I got good feedback, and I got lots of good questions afterwards, which I think is a good sign that people were into it and paying attention. So yeah, I think I'll do it again.
Yeah. What was your talk about?
It was called Managing App Complexity. And the idea was basically like, as your app gets larger, how do you make sure that it's kind of a quality talk. So like, how do you make sure bugs don't get in it? And part of that is like setting up robust testing. Some of it is thinking about how you add features and what kind of features you add and in what order to add those features. Yeah, like I talk a lot about this idea of additive versus multiplicative features. So like an additive feature is adding a new screen to your app with a new piece of functionality someone can use. A multiplicative feature is something that adds like a new way that the user can interact with every screen of your app. So that might be adding new languages or adding proper dynamic type support or voiceover support or adding an iPad version for when you were only iPhone or something like that. So being careful about adding those multiplicative features just because they do sort of add a cost to development to everything that you do, and sort of how to think about that and manage it.
So with your indie app, you try to keep like I guess like a what would you call it? Like a professional or like I would say professional workflow where you have like tests and you have like, do you have like a CD like what is it? A CD CI?
Continuous integration. Yeah, so I do. I have I have a CI set up. I use Jenkins. So I have sitting here below me, basically I have 3 Mac Minis. One of them runs the Jenkins server, and 2 are build machines that will actually run the tests and things. But personally, I'm a huge fan of UI tests, and I talk about that a little bit in the talk. So I have a suite of I think it's about 600 or so UI tests at this point. And they catch bugs all the time, especially whenever Apple releases a new version of iOS. There's just always something that breaks. And so having UI tests that basically exercise every single screen in the app, every piece of functionality, and then I can run those across all those different dimensions like dynamic type size and language and things like that. So I can run them and make sure that in all these different configurations they're working.
And was it always like that from the start, or was there like a moment when you were like, this is growing, I need to make sure that it's going to work?
Yeah, it wasn't like that at first. I think that's a really good question. A really good point is that I think if I had done that at first, it would have slowed me down a lot, and I wouldn't have been able to iterate as quickly and move as quickly. It's really being a solo developer. Like my app code base is nearly 100,000 lines of code at this point for Nihongo. And so it's just like, I can't keep up with that on my own without having some automation to help me. But in early days, like I had an iPhone only app just in English. What if that just... Oh, is it this? Okay. Threw me off there. Okay.
Yeah.
I had an iPhone only app. It was in English. Yeah, and I just didn't have this. So I think I added the test. I think I looked it up recently. It was in 2016. So about 2 years after I launched, I started really thoroughly maintaining a test suite for the app. So yeah, lots of tests. Yep.
Oh yeah, that's good to know, because when I'm building like a quick app, like if I want to build out an app that it's gonna like solve a solution that I thought would be useful for myself and maybe for other people, then I don't really think go too in depth and like building a whole bunch of tests and everything, especially if like you don't know if anyone's gonna use it.
Oh yeah, I think that totally makes sense. It was really like once I got to the point where I had an iPad version and maybe I added sync or something, and I was seeing a bunch of bugs around adding like syncing data. Oh, and you know what? It was when Apple introduced iPad, the iPad multitasking, where you could like shrink it. Obviously now this is a long time ago now, but when they went from having just full screen apps to having it so that you could like compress it and then bring it back to full, and I had a ton of
Yeah.
bugs around that, and it was just a feature that I wasn't using myself very much at all. And so it's kind of like, okay, if I don't have some tests that this is going to break, like I'm going to definitely break this. And now it's like, I mean, if I didn't have these tests, I'm sure I couldn't feel confident in releasing my app and like that there aren't going to be bugs in some corner case that I'm not thinking about, because the app is just large enough that it's just too hard to exercise everything.
Yeah, and have you had any moments where you release like an update or something and there's like a random bug that you haven't accounted for?
I mean, yeah, for sure. There's times when that happens still, but nothing really serious.
Yeah.
I also do the thing where you can roll out over 7 days.
Mhm.
So I always do that. Basically, my like roll whenever I release a new update, I roll out to 1%, wait about 24 hours. I have like logging in my app. I use Sentry now, so I can see, you know, if there's any crashes or any like errors in the app that I report back. And so I do that, roll it out to like 1%. If there's any significant things that are popping up, I'll go and fix those, and then release another update to 1%. And basically, I'll do that for usually just 1, 2, 3 rounds like that until it feels pretty good, and then I'll let it roll out all the way.
Oh, that's a really good workflow.
Yeah, I like it. So I basically, I really don't get very much customer support issues of things breaking in the app. Honestly, my biggest customer support is just payment and like subscription issues. One of the problems is that because it's a Japanese learning app, a lot of people have multiple Apple accounts, so that they can have an App Store account or iTunes account for Japanese content. So they want to be able to download apps that are only available in Japan, or buy. I mean, it used to be bigger to like buy movies and stuff or music off of iTunes in Japan. So people have multiple accounts, and then that just causes all sorts of issues when people buy the subscription on one account and then switch to another. And so that's a lot of the support I get. But in terms of bugs, it's, you know, not very much at all.
And speaking of the app, have you thought about or actually invested in like I guess like help in terms of like, I don't know, like an assistant?
I mean, I couldn't afford it right now. Like I'm basically like I'm living off of it barely.
Yeah.
But not enough to pay someone else to. And honestly, I don't need it right now. Like my customer support load is not bad enough that I need it. It's maybe a message every day, kind of maybe on average. And honestly, I get a lot of satisfaction out of solving people's problems, especially when I can, like, you know, I think people like that I'm the developer and I know the app inside and out, and I can provide really good support. And I find that satisfying. I think it's a satisfying thing to like have, you know, be able to solve someone's problem. So I think if the app got a lot bigger, then, you know, I would need to, obviously, but for now I'm good. And that's kind of why, like, I don't know if you've ever heard of I forget what it's called, but there's an idea that you basically need to find 1,000 true followers of a project or something. And this isn't just app development or indie app development or anything, but the idea that you can make a business if you can find 1,000 people that are really into it. Because if 1,000 people pay you, you know, I don't know, $30 a year or something, you know, you've got yourself basically a livable income. And so that's kind of what I focused on, is keeping this sort of niche app that I right now have about 1,500 subscribers. So it's right about a sweet spot where I can handle the customer support load myself. I can do everything myself and make enough money to live off of. I'm not really interested in growing it to be a huge company. And, you know, I kind of like the lifestyle of the size that it is right now. So.
Oh yeah, you don't want to go get venture funding or something?
No.
A growth startup?
No, not at all. I mean, like, I don't want to be, I don't want to have to justify my decisions to anybody else. Like, I love just that I get to do it all myself and be in control of everything.
Yeah. All right. And one more thing, back to SwiftLeeds. How did you pick that topic that you wanted to speak on?
That's a good question. I guess I think I developed out a lot of this sort of infrastructure around testing and I had this mental model in my head that I had something I really kind of wanted to get out, which was like this idea of my app as kind of this little blob that started out as this tiny little thing that I could just like iterate, that I could test really easily by just kind of like poking at every part of it and making sure it works. And then as it grows and grows, it kind of gets bigger and bigger and has more sort of dimensions to it. And I had kind of this mental model in my head. And if you see the talk, you might know what I'm talking about with this sort of mental model, this amorphous structure that's kind of like has all these things and it's hard to keep your eyes on it. It's hard to kind of see everything. And so I had this idea in my head that I wanted to do. I could have done a blog post about it or something, but I don't know. I find the talk a little bit more satisfying to get in front of people and talk about something rather than putting a blog post out there and then it kind of just is sort of anticlimactic or something to me where it goes out and then I don't know. I guess I don't have a big followership or anything, so it feels a little bit like I put it out and then it's kind of nothing happens. So I like doing the talk.
And you submitted what is it, like a call for paper?
Yeah. So I submitted to a bunch of different conferences, and this is the first one that I got accepted to. So.
And how was the flight? How long was it? Right?
I connected through Abu Dhabi. It was a 10-hour flight from Osaka to Abu Dhabi, and then an 8-hour flight from Abu Dhabi to Manchester, and then it was like a 2-hour bus from Manchester to Leeds. So I think door to door was 29 hours.
Damn.
Yeah, it was a lot.
And when you got there, did you have the talk the day after, or did you have like?
I arrived at 7:00 in the morning on Sunday, and my talk was about 3:30 in the afternoon on Tuesday. So I had a couple days to.
But I can imagine it's not. It didn't really help that much. Or did it?
I don't know. I actually did pretty good. I'm a pretty good sleeper, so I managed to make it through that evening. I was trying out. There's an app called Time Shifter. Which is like a jet lag management app, and it's pretty nice. It actually tells you exactly like, okay, right now you need to be, seeing bright light, or you need to be drinking coffee right now, or if you can take a nap, now's a good time to take a nap, and it preps you ahead of time. So I could start working on the jet lag before I even got on the plane. So that actually worked pretty well. And so I feel like I was okay by the time I got to my talk.
And how was was it your first conference, or had you been to one before?
I have been to some conferences before. It was my third conference, I guess. Fourth. Yeah. So I went to NS North in Montreal before the pandemic, and then Deep Dish Swift last spring, which was amazing. And then I went to Try Swift New York City actually this summer because I was back in the States for the summer, and so I went to Try Swift New York, and then SwiftLeeds.
Oh. I still haven't ventured out to a conference yet.
Yeah, you should do it. It's fun.
Yeah, I've always I didn't know about Swift. I mean, Deep Dish Swift until like the month before, so it was kind of like last minute to get tickets.
Yeah,
but now I kind of have my eye out, and I kind of know the future conferences, so I might pull up to one. I think there's one in April in New York. I might go to. Oh,
cool! Yeah, well, I'll definitely be at Deep Dish Swift this year. So if you want to be cool to meet face to face.
Oh,
so,
yeah. I don't think he's announced it, right? I don't think it's been announced.
He's more or less, he's teased it. Yeah, I mean, it's clearly happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that might be one worth checking out. And maybe I'll submit a talk, although I haven't, what's it called? I haven't, I guess, been inspired or found like something that I really would want to give a talk on, but I've been told I should give one. So
yeah. It's a good experience. Yeah.
But all right. Thank you for coming on the show. Where can the people find you?
Oh man. I guess Mastodon right now is probably the place I post the most. So I'm at Chris Vasselli at mstdn.social. Yeah. I'm also on Twitter. I'm not on that very much these days. And Threads. And on all those, I'm at Chris Vasselli.
Yeah. And if you want to learn Japanese, download Nihongo, right?
Yeah. Please.
Yeah. And a fun fact, I studied Japanese for like a month, and then and then I kind of stopped because I wanted to learn more about like AI and stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. A little more practical for your job, I bet.
Thank you guys for listening to another episode of the I Was Dev podcast. If you enjoyed the show, feel free to share this with a fellow developer. And if you want to support the show, you guys can leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, whatever platform you're listening on. And even consider joining the Patreon. Lastly, check out iOSdojo.io if you guys want to level up your skills or have some courses there. Peace.